Hey everyone, I'm Sally Abed, and this is Groundwork, a podcast about Palestinians and Israelis refusing to accept the status quo and working to change it.
Groundwork is a joint production of New Israel Fund and the Alliance for Middle East Peace.
If you're looking for our regular programming, our in-depth narrative stories, often in the field with the activists, check out our feed. This episode here is what we call Ground Report. It's part of our one-on-one series where I sit down with activists for a more straightforward interview. I get to have a conversation about who they are, what motivates them, and what kind of future they imagine for the region. My guest today is Mikhael Manekin. Mikhael is an anti-occupation activist, director of the Alliance Fellowship, and an Orthodox religious Jew living in Jerusalem. The narrative around the fight for Israel's values within the Jewish community is often told as one with a stark divide, where secular left faces off against religious right. And it's true that oftentimes religious observance and right-wing politics in Israel do go hand in hand. But Mikhael challenges that narrative. He is both an Orthodox Jew and a left-wing activist. The rise of the protest movement in Israel has brought this societal tension front and center. We covered some of the protest movement in the first episode of this season. It's called No Such Thing as Partial Democracy. Check it out if you haven't already. But in this episode, we talk to Mikhael about how the religious community fits into all of this. Where's there space on the left for activists coming from the Orthodox Jewish community? And where do they fit in the struggle to end the occupation and fight for equality? I'm Sally Abed with my guest, Mikhael Manekin. This is Ground Report. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you think is relevant.
Sure. So welcome to our house. My name is Mikhael Manekin. I live in Jerusalem, and I'm an activist. I've been a political activist for the last 2 decades, roughly. Primarily, what interests me is questions regarding Jewish-Palestinian relations, both in the occupied territories and also civic and national inequality within 1948 Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very, very modest, Mikhael.
Yeah.
How do you think those things intersect? Your activism against the occupation and, religious values and your community. And how do you navigate between them?
For me and how I was educated, they actually go quite easy together. I'm not naive, and we recognize that it's considered for good reasons to be an odd position. But from internally, it's not like we're trying to reconcile two things which don't fit. Rather, I think my sort of desire for political national equality between Jews and Palestinians, and also sort of the frustration against Jewish superiority in general, stems from my religious education and how I understand what Judaism teaches us.
Yeah, but it's also.
But yes, yeah. But sociologically,
exactly.
There's in Israel specifically, there's a connection between how right-wing you are and how religious you are. It's very sad for me as a religious person, but I don't see religion as being something that's inherently problematic. I see the challenge being with nationalist interpretation of religion and more about nationalism and specific types of nationalism or power in general, and group power being the problem. Maybe a shorthand of it would be that religious people do nationalism religiously. It's more of nationalism seeping into religion than the other way around. I think for a lot of secular people in Israel, or people who are not in the Orthodox community, it's very easy to blame an other. A lot of times people say, the occupation is because of the settlers, and, the country's moving right because of religion. And while there's an element of that that's true, it is also, I think, important to remind ourselves that, both 1967 and also the tragedies within 1948 were not perpetuated by and run by religious people, but rather by nationalism and nationalist ideology. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that there's no problem. Obviously, I operate within these communities. I'm aware of the challenges, but I think it's a bit more complex in saying there's normal democracy, and then there are the religious people who are trying to ruin it.
We see that during the protests right now. There's really almost like an anti-religious agenda, this secular, agenda, which is mistaken sometimes for the liberal democratic fight. What do you think? What's problematic about that kind of framing?
So first, before I talk about what's problematic, I empathize with it to a degree, and I think we need to take ownership for that. It's not coming out of the blue, and it's not just bigotry. I want to be self-critical about our own communities and also about our own tradition, in which, like any tradition, has a lot of challenges internally in it. We have towards non-Jews, towards women, towards LGBT. There's a whole bunch of, it's an old tradition. That being said, yes, there is a insular moment now among sort of like the liberal left camp in Israel, which is like raising the walls and closing the gates and sort of protecting their borders. And I think that's a problem for a lot of reasons. One, most importantly, because demography can't be a threat.
Mikhael is referring to the idea that the growing populations of a minority group, in this case religious Jews, pose an existential threat to the dominant social and cultural norms. And they're growing at a much faster rate. Among the Orthodox, the average number of kids per family ranges from 5.7 to 6.8 kids. For the secular family, it's 2.9.
I think if you're coming from a humanistic position in demography, you can't say there's a demographic threat about anything. More importantly, I think pushing out the problem outside of your sort of bubble is also problematic primarily to the poor.
The religious community is also by and large much poorer than the secular community.
So while I understand sort of secular frustration with the changing of the elites in this country, as an activist, my perspective is ultimately socialist, which means that there needs to be responsibility and equality towards everybody, and that means also lowering walls, not raising them.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a political memory that you have from childhood, not from childhood, younger in the years, where you actually look back at it and you're like, this is where I had a turning point. This is where my perception of things changed.
I mean, it's not, there aren't usually moments which are like epiphanies, which, at least not for me. And also, maybe I'll say I have the great fortune of growing up to religious left parents. I will say that I was thinking about this recently, that like anybody who's religious and left and goes to religious education, you go to right-wing education because that's what the religious systems are like in this country. And when I was in 7th grade, I was like during the Oslo period. And people in school knew that I was on the left. And I went to a friend's house to study for a test. And his father came in and started yelling at me in English. He was he's an American, he was really American. And he was yelling at me that I'm a pinko commie. I had no idea what those words. It was very upsetting, but I had no idea what those words meant. I didn't understand what pink had anything to do with it. I didn't understand. Commie. And I was very upset. You couldn't do it on cell phones, but I called my dad to come pick me up. And like on one hand, he was very proud of me for being who I am. But he was also there's this very awkward sort of conversation about, politics and about identity and about otherness. So yeah, I think it's part of that understanding that you get from your surroundings, that you're sort of a minority within your community, and also the ability of the majority within your community to feel very comfortable to talk to you. It is a bit of a challenge. I don't want to make too big of a deal about it, as on sort of this privilege spectrum, we're fine. There are a lot of people who are going through serious material problems, but I would say communally, it is something that you need to think about, sort of, where you want to be and how vocal you want to be, when you want to be with who. So it is a world that's that you learn how to navigate over time based on your temperament and based on how confrontational you are. I'm thinking about my 3 kids are very different, all of which in those regards, like how much you want to speak, how much you don't want to speak, that kind of thing.
What kind of schools are they attending? Also, growing up in Jerusalem in general is just tricky.
Well, I will say that this area of like South Jerusalem is I think probably the most liberal area, not left, but liberal area, probably in the world for Orthodox Jewry. So they go to religious Zionist education. But here it's important to say that the problem is that there are 4 state-run education systems.
In Israel, there are 4 tracks for state public education that people can choose from. Secular, religious, this is where Mikhael went and where he now sends his kids, Arab, and ultra-Orthodox, called yeshivas.
The secular liberal left is focused, I think, too much only on their education system, not understanding that there needs to be work on civics, democracy, equality in all education systems. That's true primarily, I think, for teacher and student rights, but also in terms of the education system. So basically, our system is what's called the religious Zionist education system is hyper-politicized, very, very right-wing, and there's nobody who would do anything on that issue because it's sort of not part of our camp. Like you made your choice, so you're outside of the sphere of education, which I think is, it's frustrating as an individual, but I think more importantly, it's problematic politically because we're basically creating the problem that then we're frustrated about the growth of, instead of saying so I think the cardinal sin here is the 4 different education systems and the importance to, build one.
It's similar. We're isolating the religious community as a left. And then we still complain about it and go and protest against whole communities. I think, a lot of people that would be listening to this, they wouldn't see why everything that you do and your story and the otherness that you said, all the, I resonate with a lot.
Yeah.
And people will be like, how come? And I think we both come from a place where we always had that sense of otherness. Yeah. Me as a Palestinian, but not only as a Palestinian, as someone who did have political activism where my parents, really were completely conditioned not to, and my grandparents. So like they always, I was fighting my community, whether in that or whether on, anti-normalization or normalization accusations and stuff like that, which I still do. And I think, we're both trying to be very true to ourselves and to our communities, which are not always very accepting or understanding of what we do, but we do that through also imposing our part or our belonging to a new kind of group, and where people don't really see us there. People don't understand why I have to fight for housing or for minimum wage or for LGBTQ rights as a Palestinian. Like, why do you do that? Makashur. Like, what does it have to do with it? And I think, being able to impose ourselves in this new story, in this new political protagonist for our community to see us and try to drag them with us and, bring them with us. I really resonate with that. And I hope.
Amen to you as well. I mean, yeah, for sure. Well, I wouldn't I think both of us wouldn't diss on otherness too much. I think it gives you real privilege a lot of times to be sort of other in that place of sort of outside or semi-outside. It challenges to some extent, but also gives you a lot of tools that I don't think people have from within.
We're the ones navigating a lot of complexities.
Oh, for sure.
It definitely brings
I wouldn't trade
solutions.
For anything. For sure.
Okay, last question. And it's my favorite.
Okay.
You live here in Jerusalem. Let's imagine a day 5 years from now, 10 years from now, X years from now, where the things that you're working towards have actually been fulfilled. You actually achieved the change you want to see.
Sure.
And take us into a day in Jerusalem with your kids, with your family, with your work. How does it look like?
So you're saying like end of occupation, East Jerusalem is Palestinian.
Everything. The sky's the limit.
Well, I don't know. This isn't a very progressive thing to say. When the occupation ends, God willing, it's not.
It ended.
When it ended.
It ended.
It
No,
ended.
let's take that.
But they're always there are always challenges. It's not like after it ends, like the Messiah comes. Maybe, but I think so long as you're living in a world with people with power, so there are people without it, and then the question is, how do you sort of place yourself within that? And as Jews here, we're very lucky because we're the ones with power, and there's something which is sort of not even natural about the position of the left-wing Jew in this country who wants to get rid of what he has. There's always going to be. There's always problems.
Yeah, but one thing that strikes me right now that you said is that the Israeli leftist would want to relinquish, some kind of privileges,
maybe some,
which is true in many ways. But you did mention socialist, approach to these things, and I don't see it that way. As a Palestinian, I can't imagine how. A Haredi guy from Bnei Brak, or an Ethiopian guy from Rehovot, or a Mizrahi guy from Petach Tikva are relinquishing any kind of privilege. There are plenty of minority Jewish communities in Israel, like the Mizrahi or Ethiopian Jews. And I wanted to point out that we need to start rethinking the way we talk about the left, so that it also includes people with less privilege who have interest in the same types of changes we are calling for. It's just hard for me to come to him and be like, liberate me, relinquish your privilege,
I very much accept that point. And perhaps I was automatically assuming when I said left, I automatically assumed a certain type of archetype, like, like upper middle class, Ashkenazi, and so on. So I accept that point for sure. But I will say that, and it is important for me to push on this point, specifically because of the community of which I am, which I think, like within Orthodox communities, I think there is an openness to talk about internal Jewish poverty in a different way. And that's why it's always important for me to remind myself sort of the forgotten dynamic within the Jewish tradition, especially in a city like Jerusalem, which is, we have this saying that people always throw out in Hebrew of Aniyei Chakodmim, which is the poor of your city come first. And a lot of times they say that as sort of like an like a tribal thing, like first we take care of our own, but my city, the poorer of my city are either ultra Orthodox or Arab, and they need to come first. So I think that's sort of
the most underrepresented.
For sure. In different ways. Yeah.
You still didn't give me a day. It's hard.
No.
It's hard. I think it's so hard for us to imagine, especially I think in here, it's like the epicenter, right, of the whole thing. So imagining the change in Jerusalem.
Say something. I think there is, if there's anything that's exciting and hopeful to look forward to, is the tremendous openness which can be created to sort of like cultural cross-border, let's call it cultural and religious and political conversation. If I look at sort of the texts that I care about in terms that define my Jewish tradition, my activist tradition, that were written in the Middle Ages or whatever, a lot of them were influenced by Islamic culture and Christian culture. So if something that I'm looking forward to seriously is being able to have like a conversation about faith or about politics after this is over. And it's important to do it after this is over because we can't have a conversation with another when our boot is on their neck, So first needs to come equality, and then needs to happen this sort of cross-cultural conversation, I think.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mikhael. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Shkoyach.
So that was my conversation with Mikhael. And before we end the episode, I did want to share a few thoughts. My conversation with Mikhael was really very special in a sense that, we do come from two communities that are usually seen as unlikely alliances, or as two groups that are probably on the on the different ends of the spectrum in Israeli society. And it was very, very interesting for me to be able to really empathize with his experience in the left, for me as a Palestinian woman, and for him as an Orthodox Jewish man. Starting way back at the beginning of the year, we saw hundreds of thousands of people organizing in Tel Aviv, marching, demonstrating in the streets. And I think really, these demonstrations are really opening up, and should open up, a conversation about the Israeli left and the new Israeli left that we want to see, and who's welcome, who's allowed to participate, and who is actually supposed to be part of the Israeli left. Because at the end of the day, whose problems are we addressing? We will be back with our regular program in 2 weeks, so please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We need your help. If you found what you just heard meaningful, if you think this kind of reporting is important, then please take a few seconds right now and rate us and give us a review on whatever platform you're using to listen. It will go a long way to help us get the word out. Groundwork is created and produced by Dina Kraft and Yoshi Fields. The Ground Report is reported by me, Sally Abed, with content and audio editing by Yoshi. Yoshi also scored the piece. Additional scoring by Matan Fields. Additional content editing by Elisheva Goldberg and Nick Acosta. Art and design by Nick Acosta. The show is a joint production of New Israel Fund and the Alliance for Middle East Peace. New Israel Fund is the premier funder and organizer of progressive Israeli civil society, with over $300 million from tens of thousands of people to hundreds of organizations working for change on the ground for over 40 years. The Alliance for Middle East Peace is the largest and fastest growing network of Palestinian and Israeli peace builders. You can learn more about them in their website in nif.org and almep.org. And you can learn more about our show at their websites or at groundworkpodcast.com. Our theme music is by System Ali, a multilingual binational hip-hop group whose cultural activity is deeply rooted in the communities where they work. Additional music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. Until next time, شكراً على المتابعة.